Hello. Okay, I just need to add our lovely chair. I'm not quite sure how to do this, so bear with me. I think that's working now, the lovely Rowan. There she is.
Hello.
Hi, Rowan.
Hiya.
I'm good, how are you?
How is it going? How's it going, everyone in the chat as well? Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah.
I'm got my headphones on just in case there's some interference. I've had some technical issues earlier this week, so I thought it would be safer than having both of our voices echoing over each other.
Yeah, I was so tech savvy.
Um, cool. So basically I'm just going to go ahead, get into it, so asking the questions. But in the chat, if you have any questions for Calum, please ask them in the chat. We have some lovely people at Calum's publisher who are on a Google Doc ready to type your questions up, so I can have a look at them at the end of the chat, and we can ask Calum everything you want to know, as well as the things that I want to know, which I get to ask first because I'm sharing.
Sounds good.
This is the book. It is right beside me. I almost left it on the other side of the room. I was like, oh, go get it. So I actually just finished this a couple of days ago.
But I
And
put it in your face, so just didn't do that.
I finished this a couple of days ago. I really want to know, first question, it's a classic to begin with. Where did the idea for this come from?
Well, it is non-fiction, obviously. So story, I guess, of my life, of my early 20s specifically. And honestly, so many of the stories that I've told in this book are the kinds of stories that I've been telling to friends and family at dinner parties around the dinner table for years and years. And it's always the stories that I've been telling where I've noticed that people start to lean in, and you can tell that they're listening and they can't wait to hear what happens next. And, a lot of people actually did say to me, oh, you should maybe write these stories into a book one day. And lo and behold, that's what I did.
Tell me about the title, Eat, Gay, Love.
Yes.
What's the deal?
So it's clearly wordplay. Perhaps not the best wordplay, but it's wordplay on Eat, Pray, Love, which is actually probably my favorite book by the amazing Elizabeth Gilbert. I'm sure have you read it?
Yeah. I haven't read it. I'm familiar, and with her podcast as well.
Amazing. Yeah. And I adored that book, and it massively inspired the travel that I actually went on all those years ago. And yeah, it just really, really resonated with me. And when I first started blogging a long time ago, we're talking 10 years back, my blog was called Eat, Gay, Love. And then when I started a YouTube channel, that was called Eat, Gay, Love. And it just seems like the next obvious step was to name the book Eat, Gay, Love as well. At first, it was a working title. And I don't think I ever expected that it would stick all the way to publication, but it did. And I think it does what it says on the tin. So, yeah.
I realize we kind of jumped straight in, as if people know what's going on with this book. So what should readers expect from it? What are they going to be getting if they pick it up?
So it is an LGBT plus travel memoir. It tells the story of the several years I spent living abroad in my early 20s. I explore several countries: Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Thailand, India, the UK, Spain. I always miss one. I'm not sure which one I'm missing, something. And yeah, it follows me on my journey through these different countries. And it's very much kind of it's a self-discovery, as it was. And it's me navigating the LGBT plus community in particular. So I meet so many different LGBT plus people around the world, and their stories are in there as well.
I was going to say, because it's kind of an interesting mix of travel writing, memoir, and personal experiences, relationships. There's kind of a little bit of everything in there. How did you choose to kind of be balancing and going between these different genres rather than just, writing a straight memoir or a straight travel?
It was, to be completely honest with you, it was almost tempting to just go down the more traditional travel memoir route. But I think once I started, writing down these stories and putting the stories on paper, I realized that there was such profound meaning behind them. So many of the people in the book, they faced such hardships, which, that really affected me going on these journeys. And I think once I started putting pen to paper, I think I realized that there was something more here. And that's very much what I wanted to explore. And I like to think I've done an okay job.
I like to think you have too, and that I have read it, and I agree that you have. I mean, what was the writing process like for you? Had you done a lot of writing before, or was this something a little bit new to be trying out for you?
No, I mean, attempting to write since I was very, very small. When I was 8 years old, I tried to write my first book, and
Classic.
I successfully got the words down on the paper. It was about it was a horror story about vampire hamsters. Was what I read when I was brilliant young mind. So writing has always been an enormous part of my life. I've always been writing. I went to university to study creative writing. Mm-hmm. I worked as a copywriter for a job. So I've dabbled in and out of writing for so many years, but actually finally getting to write my first book, which, you know, is what I've been wanting to do my whole life, was a wonderful experience, but also so unbelievably grueling. Nobody ever told me going to be hard. I thought I would just sit in Starbucks and, you know, tip tap away on my little laptop and have a lovely time of it. But it's actually blood, sweat and tears. It's actually bloody hard work.
Can you talk about a little bit about that? Like, when you were writing, did you find yourself getting into a rhythm with it? Was it, you know, some of the, because all of the there's kind of like chapters, sections in the book, and each one is based on a different city or place that you've lived in or visited. Did you find some much easier to write than others? Would you write all of one and then all of the next one, or did you kind of flip between?
I mean, I'm the worst planner in the world. You know, if anybody here is here looking for writing advice, do not take this advice, because it's probably not how you write a book. But I very much just kind of went with whatever I wanted to write that day. So if I was sat there thinking about the time I spent in Thailand, living in the animal sanctuary, I would literally grab my laptop and start typing through that. Or if I was thinking about Italy or wherever, until I kind of had all of the different stories down, and then started working on threading all of those things together, which is literally probably the backwards way that you're supposed to do it. But that was very much my process. Just write what I enjoy, and I did try to enjoy the process.
I'm kind of interested in, so I imagine that a lot of people are quite unfamiliar with the publishing process in general, and I think if people are more familiar, they're probably more familiar with the fiction side of things. So with fiction writing, you generally, although not all the time, will have written a whole manuscript and then you'll go and take it to agents and to publishers. Whereas with non-fiction, oftentimes you're writing more of a pitch or an idea or an outline. How was that for you? Did you kind of come to them and say, hey, this is an idea that I have, and have it mapped out quite close to what it ended up being, or has it kind of changed a bit through the process?
Yeah, I've been on like quite an interesting journey, I think, with the publishing process. So years and years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, I was actually approached by a publisher who said, would you be interested in writing a book? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I've wanted my whole life. Yes, of course I would be interested in writing a book. And I actually had the idea for Eat, Gay, Love kind of in the back of my mind, like this might be a good idea for a book one day. And I said that to them. I said, I've got this idea and I would love to write this book. And they just weren't interested. They wanted me to write like a guide to being gay, and which you know, I think those kinds of things are wonderful and so important, but that's not what I wanted to write. And they just weren't interested in my idea. So I went away and I said I wasn't interested, which was a very difficult thing to do. You know, you're your dream on a plate to say no. And then I met my incredible literary agent. We'd met a few times at various friends' book launches and things like this. And we got talking, and she said she would potentially be interested in seeing some of my work. So it's at that point I started, you know, jotting down some of the ideas for Eat, Gay, Love, and having a very rough plan of what that would look like. Sent a little writing sample to her. She loved it. And then we went through the process of sending it to publishers, writing out the proposal. And again, I don't think I realized how much work goes into the work that I had to do before I could actually even sit down and start writing the book properly. Was you know, months and months and months of work. So yes, I think we don't talk about the writing and the publishing process enough. So I'm really glad you asked that question.
Was there any because all of the sections that you have in the book are so, feel so specific and so fleshed out and so full of life. Were there any that didn't make it into the book? Were there any places that you visited that you were like, oh, I wish I could talk about it, but it's not quite right for this, or I didn't have, I had an experience that was too similar to another one that I've written about in the book, or anything like that? Or did you pack it all in?
That's a really, really great question, because there were originally, when I was planning this book, there were going to be different sections as well. One of them was Amsterdam. I actually,
Ooh.
line of this book, and I think I mention it in a brief sentence. I say, and then I went to Amsterdam for a little bit. But that's all, that's the only thing I say about it. Whereas I had actually once kind of envisaged that being a whole section of the book, and several chapters being about Amsterdam and life in Amsterdam, because obviously I had an amazing time there and I had so many interesting experiences there. But I just felt that they weren't right for this book, predominantly because I didn't really explore much of the LGBT plus culture in Amsterdam. I was living with a straight girl and we went out to coffee shops and had a great time. But I didn't really, I wanted to stay true to the kind of LGBT plus narrative that runs throughout the book. So yeah, I kind of had to drop that. And it was definitely the right decision. And there are other things as well, like you do go to Switzerland in this book with me, but I'm there for perhaps just a few pages, whereas I once envisaged that being a lot longer and being loads and loads of chapters dedicated to that. But once I started putting pen to paper, I realized it didn't need that.
It's very, it's interesting because you have this classic travel writing element that creeps in, of talking about food, talking about the landscape or the places that you're staying at. But I'd say that most of it is people led. It's about the people that you've met and your experiences with them. How was it for you? I mean, a lot of the things that you're talking about in the book happened years ago, sometimes like a decade ago or more. How did you feel about having to sort of replicate not only your experiences and your memories, but also these other people, and kind of recount these full conversations with them, and how you were feeling at the time? Did you kind of feel like you could slip back into how you were as a 20-something, or were you always conscious of thinking about it from the age you are now, like looking back at yourself as a sort of more naive person?
Yeah, I mean, I think luckily, when I was traveling, I always kept a notebook with me, blogging and things like that. So I often made notes and wrote things down, which massively helped. If I didn't have those notes, I think it would have been a much more difficult book to write. But you're absolutely right. And, you know, trying to draw back on conversations, because sometimes there are specific things that people say, they really stuck with you, and I can hear the people saying the exact words that they said. There's one part in the book where one of the characters, Ying, is talking about prison, and I can almost hear that conversation in my mind, exactly verbatim how it was said. But then there are other conversations, it's like, well, I remember the gist of what we were talking about, and I remember the meaning behind what was said. But yeah, recalling exactly what was said is difficult. And so to then recreate those conversations and to try and get people's tone of voice right, it's really quite difficult to do. And I really hope I did these amazing people justice. I hope they think so.
So you cover a lot, as well as the kind of the people. It's not just a selection of individuals that you meet. There's also each of them kind of having their own experiences and their own issues and struggles that you sort of brush up alongside. Were you quite conscious of the amount of, I guess, some people might term it in the publishing world, issues that you had brought into the book? So not just kind of the LGBT style issues, but talking about like homelessness and abuse and things like that. How conscious were you of making it or not making it about the issues that you kind of talk about?
You know, I want people to pick up the book and think this is going to be an enjoyable read, and I want them to go from start to finish and really take enjoyment, like they're on this adventure with me, going from country to country. That's the experience people I want to have. But at the same time, I want them to pick up upon, you know, all these different issues that I talk about throughout the narrative. And I really want, I guess it's almost like I want the book to serve as it's an invitation almost to go away and explore these issues a little bit further, because I'm no expert on so many. I'm not really an expert on anything, but I'm certainly not an expert on some of the issues within this book. Things like homelessness and drug abuse and even like trans identities, things like this. I'm not an expert on these issues, but I want people to have the same experience I did when I was traveling and meeting these people and being like, oh gosh, like, wow, that is really striking and that's really affecting and that has really changed my perspective on this. I want people to have the same experience that I did when I was traveling. And then I want people to go, okay, I'm really interested in this specific issue. I find it shocking that, you know, an enormous percentage of homeless people, young homeless people, are LGBT plus. I want to go away and learn about that now, and I want to how I can help. What charity can I donate to? Which charity can I work to? I really, really want people to have that takeaway. And yeah, like I say, I'm not claiming to be an expert, and I very much just kind of brush up against these issues rather than give them the in-depth analysis that they deserve. I mean, there's not the space. You know, I go through so many countries and meet so many people, and there are so many issues touched upon that there just isn't the room to give them kind of the full conversation that they deserve.
It's interesting because when I was at uni, I wrote and directed a lot of plays, and one of them was for the kind of drama festival that happened every single year, and did the play, and then we got live feedback immediately. And one of the pieces of live feedback was like, there's just a lot of issues in this. There's just a lot of things happening to one family, to one person. And it was all quite semi-autobiographical. I was like, this has all happened to me and my friends. Like, this is all very much a thing that actually does happen to people. And I really appreciated that you did talk about that stuff. You didn't try and kind of be like, oh yes, we will talk about the one issue and that will be it. And we will kind of ignore all the other things that happen in people's lives. Because as you say, a lot of this stuff might seem on the surface separate to queer life, but is very linked. Queer homelessness, youth homelessness being a really key example of that. And something that happens within our country that I think a lot of people might think of as being, you know, homophobia is something that happens elsewhere or is sort of the exception in the UK, rather than something that we see in all these other issues that are happening right now.
Absolutely, and I think particularly for people outside of the LGBT plus community reading, and I really hope that people outside of the LGBT plus community do pick up the book and read it. I've had like some feedback from like family members and things who have now read the book, and they're almost shocked, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you met all of these LGBT plus people battling with all of different things. Like, what are the chances? And it's like, it's not what are the chances. It's like LGBT plus people everywhere are experiencing these things all the time, constantly. And I think, you know, I really want to drive that message home as well, that these aren't some freak incidences of, you know, some awful things happening. It's like these things are happening all the time, constantly.
Well, you talk about it in the book, the idea of, you know, you almost call the reader out and you say, look, you might be reading this and thinking, oh yeah, you happen to be teaching in a summer school and you're the one gay student happen to be in your class.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, no, because there's probably a gay student, at least one in every single class. And it was just because you were openly gay in that school that they knew that you were a safe person to come out to.
Absolutely. And, you know, I talk about one experience of teaching in Italy in the book, but I actually had many experiences of teaching in Italy, Switzerland, Germany. And pretty much every single class that I ever taught, there would always be, you know, one LGBT plus student, and some of them would already be out, and many of them would come out to me. You know, they're everywhere. But I think perhaps if they were being taught by a straight teacher who wasn't open, or an LGBT plus person who wasn't open about who they were, then maybe you wouldn't realize that they were even there.
Yeah. We're going to keep asking questions in a second. Just for everyone who's joined in since we started, we are going to be taking questions from the chat. So if you put them in there, the Calum's lovely team are going to be compiling them. Already I can see over here to my right on a Google Doc for us to ask the questions at the end, and we will hopefully be able to get through as many as possible. So any questions that come up for Calum about the book, about what we're talking about, please feel free to ask them. I've seen some kind of whiz up already, so yeah, definitely get those in before the end of the chat.
I'm just so happy you're doing this. Like,
thanks so much. Thanks for asking me. I'm so happy that you sent me this book so I could read it. The teacher thing, I think, really struck a chord with me. I used to tutor and I used to teach, and that experience of being queer and having to make that decision as to whether or not you come out to your class, which even as someone who was like very outspoken about being LGBT, very outspoken about the way it should be taught in schools, still kind of felt this weird wariness of like, oh God, can I? Even knowing that in my own days at school, you know, teachers would be open about the fact that they had a husband if they were women, or had a wife if they were men, or, you know, had gotten engaged, and you know, this was all stuff that was talked about when the teachers were heterosexual. But I was really exciting to me, and like a negatively exciting, I guess, if that's a way of putting it, to see that experience in there, because it felt so real to me. And something that I imagine like still happens now. I don't necessarily think that that's something that will have gone away, especially with everything that's happened with the Now Outsiders program and the protests around having kind of LGBT issues discussed in schools. Do you think that education is key to addressing this kind of homophobia and the issues that a lot of us go through later in life, that you kind of experience so many people from all over the world who had experienced that? Actually, it's at that very root, that very beginning, that education where you can ask them, you know, draw a picture of your ideal partner and come out, and it's actually something that can be quite fulfilling, not just to the LGBT students, but to the straight students who are hearing that as well.
Yeah, it's so important, and I think, you know, part of this is often rooted in, there's almost like an over sexualization of LGBT people, and the idea that I can't say that I have a partner or a husband, not that I do. But the idea that I can't say that to my students, because that's somehow talking about sex, and it's not. That's talking about a relationship. And as you pointed out there, when I was growing up in school, the teachers would always mention their partners and husbands. I even met some of them sometimes. So the idea that we can't do the same thing is quite shocking. And I have LGBT plus friends now who are working as teachers, and you know, they still battle with that on the day-to-day basis of, you know, should I be talking about my sexuality or who I am with my students? Because on one hand, you're going to have people within your class, LGBT plus or otherwise, who are going to enormously benefit from you talking about that. But then you will always have people saying, well, you shouldn't be talking about your personal life. So it's really difficult. But I personally think it's so instrumental to the development of young LGBT plus people, for them to have LGBT plus role models and figures in their lives, like across the board, and teachers should be just a part of that. I know that I personally, it would have, you know, I didn't meet another LGBT plus person until I was 16 years old. And thinking that now feels insane, because, you know, I have so many LGBT plus people in my life now, but true, 16 years of my life not having met not one person who was LGBT plus. If I had had a teacher who had, you know, happened to mention that they were LGBT plus, or even that it was, you know, okay to be gay, then I think that completely changed my world. It sounds dramatic, but I really, really do believe that.
Yeah, I talked a lot to my head teacher when I was at school, very predictably, if you know me, about the kind of homophobia that was very rife, and the fact that a lot of teachers didn't feel comfortable, even if they were in support, you know, in their personal lives with LGBT people, they didn't feel comfortable challenging homophobia in the classroom. And when we pointed out that like it would actually be quite useful to have at least one member of staff, not like to come out, but just to say, yep, I am a safe person to come to if you're worried about these things, you know, you can talk to me, I'm not going to tell anyone, like it's been fine. And she said that they weren't going to do that because it could lead to inappropriate relationships. And I was like, oh, it was almost so shocking to me as someone who kind of really hoped that wasn't still the attitude, that I sort of didn't quite know what to say about that. But it is this idea of it being inherently something sexual or something perverse or something weird, which is so this propaganda that's been going for such a long time. And so it's so like it really in that first section of the book, when you're talking about that, it was like, oh, what an impact that this one person can come into a school, not even for that long, just as like through the summer, and have that impact. I went to a school and had people come out to me just from doing like a panel at their school, and I think that's really shows how starved for validation and positivity a lot of these kids are. So yeah, that was a really interesting, particularly for me, a really interesting section of the book. But I think what's so great about the memoir is that as we said before, does cover so many different topics in such a really empathetic and open way that there will be experiences in here that people will look at and say, oh, that's something that I really resonate with. That's like a city I've been to, and I've been to the same scene or the same restaurant or the same club, or I totally understand that feeling of like staying up through to the next morning and getting breakfast in a kind of 24-hour cafe with your best mates and feeling this like sense of community with them. Like there's so many elements, as well as being able to look at it and be like, oh God, that is an experience I have never had. I'm so interested in this person and their life, and as you said, like then jumping off and exploring more issues, going and looking at what people have been through from other sources as well.
And there is an amazing. I'm really excited about the prospect of LGBT people in particular picking up this book, and you know, whichever section it is that resonates with them, finding something in there that makes them feel like, oh, somebody else understands me and I feel seen. I mean, both of us have YouTube channels, and we've been making us content on YouTube for many years now, and I know that feeling of putting a thought or a feeling out there onto the internet and having people hear that for the first time and go, I understand that. And you know, I've done it myself. I've watched other people's videos, or I've read other people's books and had that same experience. So yeah, that makes me feel nice, warm and fuzzy. The idea that somebody might find themselves in one of the pages or many of the pages.
Was there an experience that you've included in the book that was the most resonant for you or had the biggest impact on you, would you say?
I think I think it probably would be those first chapters, the section in Italy, because of things like, I mean, we didn't really touch upon it then, but like section 28, when I don't know you, but when, yeah, I think so. When we were growing up, 28 prevented teachers from in the UK from being able to talk to their students about being LGBT plus, and that's something that we lived through, and I think that's something that there's still a hangover of that today in schools, and I think teachers are still afraid to talk about those issues, etc., with children. And I think I do think there was something special about that, and you know, about working with young people and young LGBT plus people, and you know, people who were just beginning to get a grasp of who they were. Because I think, you know, I'm incredibly lucky. I live here in London now. I have so many LGBT plus friends. I go out regularly on the gay scene, all of these things. And you know, I remember a time growing up in a small town when I didn't have any of that. So I think, you know, that was the jumping off point for the book. So I think that is probably the bit that's closest to my heart. But I mean, the whole thing, I mean, Thailand was great fun.
The story, I mean, we've touched a little bit, you were talking about your background in creative writing, and the fact you've kind of been approached about another non-fiction sort of memoirsque book before. Just knowing you, I know that fiction is something that you're really interested in. I'd be really interested to hear about the choice for you to start with non-fiction in terms of your writing journey, whether that was just that the opportunity arose and you kind of took it and you created this amazing book, or whether that was a conscious decision to do this one first.
Yeah, I think I mean, I really do want to go into fiction, and you know, like that now, and that is where I want to end up. I want to, you know, one day I hope to look back and see that I've written a whole stack of lovely fiction books. I really hope that happens one day. But it felt really important for me to kind of start with this non-fiction book, because I mean, I guess I already have kind of built a small platform online. And I have people looking to me, and I think a lot of those people kind of wanted to know and hear my story. But I also think that it's almost like I built this persona online, which has always been, you know, 100% me and 100% truthful to who I am. But there was this huge part of my life that was missing, that I'd never really talked about. And that was my early 20s, traveling around the world, meeting all of these people who had this unbelievable impact on me as a person. And I think I felt that I needed to get all of that out. And I felt like it was like, this book is me explaining who I am. It's, I mean, it is my debut to the world. and it's saying, this is who I am, this is where I've come from, this is all of the ideas, this is all the things that have affected me, that has led me to this point. And then once I've got all of that out, and then I can move on to writing other things. And I not that this book isn't joyous, because I think it is. I think it is full of joyous moments, but there are parts which are quite heavy as well. And I'm actually really looking forward to just writing things that are purely uplifting.
I mean, I was going to ask you another question, but I have a feeling from the answer that I maybe know the answer to this, but I'll ask you anyway. This is travel writing in a way, but it's travel writing where you're looking back at travel. You weren't going to those places specifically to write about them. You kind of talked about keeping these notebooks or journals, but it wasn't necessarily so that they would then become part of the public consciousness. Are you interested in that kind of element of travel writing where you go somewhere specifically as a travel writer, or do you think that there's a kind of more of an authenticity in not necessarily going somewhere to try and find a story, but writing about the stories that you find along the way?
Yeah, I think both are authentic in their own way, but I do think there was something about having these experiences, because I was going from place to place, not knowing where I was going. I had no home to go back to, so I was always kind of forced to move forwards, and I was quite literally living on a whim and meeting whoever happened to be there and just going on these adventures with them. And there was nothing planned, there was nothing calculated about it. And I think had I been on the exact same journey, had I been to the exact same countries, I might have gone there with an agenda. I might have gone there going, okay, this is the thing that I want to learn and discover about in this country. I mean, if we take the India section, for instance, I talk so much about the LGBT plus rights in India and how that they've changed over the years, and how they were quite literally changing when I was in the country. I had no foresight of that when I went to India. I happened to go to India, and then suddenly I realized it was at this very kind of crucial turning point in their LGBT plus history, and I just so happened to be there. And I think my whole experience would have been completely different if I'd gone there with the idea of writing in mind. So I'm happy it was, spontaneous and all over the place, and I think the book lends itself to that. I mean, some of it just get a little bit random, I think, but
it feels very much like an image of a map, and when characters move in movies, like they fly a plane and it's like a little Calum face, like going to this place, and then you like zoom in to this one particular house where you're like having a party, or like being like in a placement or something, and then you're like, and here I go again, I'm across the world.
Sure. Yeah, because
that I really enjoy.
I really like that that's your takeaway from it. Because I don't spend a lot of time dwelling on the whys and the hows. Like, I don't tell you like, and then I took this plane and this flight, and then this was, I was going to this country. You finish in one section, I'm like, that story's wrapped up, and then you land with me in the next bit.
Do you find that being gay has affected the way in which you've traveled? Like, were you aware when you were super aware then, or more or less aware now of, like you said, about like going to India and having particular rights, or countries where it's illegal to be gay, or where it could be punishable, or that they don't have equal marriage, or there's no protection for workers who are LGBT, for example? Does that factor into the way you think about travel? Is that something that affects the way that either you go about choosing where to go, or how you act and respond when you're there?
Yeah, I think it's something I touch upon, but only very, very briefly in the book. And that's I did go to Morocco when I was a teenager, and I didn't realize that it was illegal to be gay in Morocco until I was already within the country. And I think that realization really changed something in me, and that really made me realize that, I can't just go to any country in the world willy-nilly, and that I do kind of have to do my research and see if it's safe. Am I going to be persecuted? And I think it's rare for these things to happen to tourists, but it does happen. So I think you do, as an LGBT plus person, you do have to be knowledgeable about where you're traveling. I think, you know, a few years ago there was I can't even remember who it was, but there was a transgender celebrity, I think, and they were detained in Dubai, I think. And they just had no idea that they couldn't visit. I mean, fact check that, because I'm not sure on the laws in Dubai, but I think it was Dubai. So that was one thing that enormously shaped my travel. But also, I think before, I mean, I mentioned earlier reading Eat, Pray, Love, for instance. One of my favorite books, absolutely adore it. But when Elizabeth Gilbert was going on her travels, so much of that was shaped by, you know, like potential romances and meeting people. And I think I very much had that expectation when I started traveling, that I was going to have all of these flings and meet all of these people and have all of these exciting, spicy encounters. And it wasn't that way. I mean, there were a few, and there are some romances in this book, but a lot of the time it was incredibly lonely traveling. I mean, I was traveling completely by myself, and I think I wanted those little sparks of romances to happen, but I'd often, you know, arrive in a town somewhere and feel like I was the only LGBT plus person there. And I'm sure I wasn't. I'm sure there were other LGBT plus people, but sometimes it was really hard to find them. So that was quite lonely. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, you know, queer people have a very different experience of traveling for that reason.
Absolutely. Again, for everyone in the chat, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but if there is anyone new, I can see from the Google Doc that you're all asking questions. If you ask them in the chat, then we are compiling them on a Google Doc and I will move on to them. We are just a bit over halfway through the live chat today. So get them in and I will move over to them in just a little bit. Talking about the idea of the experience that you had traveling and people who aren't gay themselves not necessarily knowing what that's like, you do have some kind of LGBT representation within this book, but obviously because it's non-fiction and because it's based on your personal life, you're not able to just like invent a lesbian in Vienna that you can like talk about for a chapter. It's kind of very much confined by the experiences that you have genuinely had. But I know you as a person, like representation is something that you're really interested in. So is that something that you're kind of seeing as being part of your future within fiction writing, or how conscious were you of creating a memoir rather than like an LGBT travel book that's all encompassing?
Yeah, it was, honestly, this is one of the things that genuinely kept me up at night. You know, LGBT plus representation has always been, I think it's in my Twitter bio, you know, passionate about LGBT plus representation. That has, you know, always been my thing. And then I come to write this book and it's, you know, it's supposed to be about LGBT plus people around the world, but because it's nonfiction and because it's true, I realized it's actually a little bit limiting. You know, most of the, I say LGBT plus, but most of the characters in this book are gay men. That's not to say that there isn't representation. You know, there is a transgender character, there is a lesbian character, there's bisexual characters. Those people are there, but I would have loved them to have been a great deal more prominent. But yeah, as you say, I can't just invent a lesbian in Vienna. If I mean, I have tried to ensure that I'm continually bringing the conversations back to being inclusive of everybody, you know. So I do spend a little bit of time in the book talking about non-binary people, for instance, even though there is only one non-binary person in the book, very, 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 very briefly, just trying to bring those people back. And also little moments where perhaps I'm in the middle of a Pride festival and just, you know, mentioning that, you know, you see a lesbian couple kissing or you see a transgender person, trying to find little ways to still include those people without fabricating people that didn't exist. So it was really, 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 really difficult. I like to think that within the kind of confines of the truth, that I've done my best to be as inclusive as possible. But yeah, absolutely, with my fiction going forwards, I can't wait to make that even more inclusive. I want to stick to writing LGBT plus stories, focusing on LGBT plus characters, and I want that to cover people from right across the rainbow spectrum.
Amazing. I have some more questions for you myself, but what I'm going to do is probably go over to these questions and over here from everyone in the chat first, just in case. And if we have time, I'll come back to the rest of mine. But I'm very conscious of like not wanting anyone to miss out on having the chance to answer a question. So let's make this bigger because I am extremely blind and cannot see what is going on. So at Steph Ferguson has asked, what was the main message you wanted to get across to the reader whilst writing the book?
I mean, yeah, I feel like I'll spoil the whole book if I tell you that, but no, I will. I think the biggest takeaway is that it's above all else, it's a book about the kindness of strangers, and I want LGBT plus people in particular to know that we have this incredible community that spans right across the world. And for me personally, wherever I went, there was always LGBT plus people, and sometimes it wasn't that easy to find them. In India, for instance, I talk about meeting one LGBT plus person, and that's it. But that person had a profound impact on me, and you know, I get myself into some quite sticky situations. I was a young, naive boy in his early 20s, and I made some mistakes along the way, and it was the amazing LGBT plus people around the world that helped, you know, get me back on the right track and keep me moving forwards to the life I was always supposed to have. So it's really, above all else, it's a celebration of LGBT people all around the world.
I mean, speaking of celebration, you've just segued really well into another question. Unfortunately, not entirely sure who asked this one. I think it might be a couple of people smushed together. I think a few people have asked these questions. What is your favourite thing about being gay, and did that help you to sort of accept yourself when you were coming to terms with your sexuality?
I mean, it's hard. I don't want to repeat what I've just said, but I kind of feel that I need to, you know, like my favorite thing about being gay is that I have access to this incredible community that, yeah, we're welcoming of straight people, of course we are, and you know, straight people are welcome at Pride, all of that, but it's not their culture and it doesn't belong to them, but it does belong to us. And yes, LGBT people, gay people, we do have to face hardships, you know, particularly when we're growing up. But in a lot of ways, it kind of feels worth it because I get this incredible community, and you know, my whole world is LGBT plus people, and I feel so grateful to have that. So that's without a doubt my favorite thing about being gay, being a part of all of this.
We have a question from @Assassination Culture and Karma. What age rating would you give the book?
Oh, that's a tricky question.
It is a tricky question.
I mean, I'd like that anybody can read it, but I don't think that's necessarily true. You know, there's drug use in this book. There are sex clubs in this book. So it's definitely, it's written for, I'm not saying that younger people can't or shouldn't read it, but I think if you are a younger person going into it, you need to be aware that those things are there and to perhaps have a wider understanding of those topics. So yeah, I really don't know how to answer that question, but it's written for adults, is what I'll say.
I'd agree with that. Good answer. I'm so sorry to everyone for absolutely butchering any usernames that you have, but I will try my best. At Corsolis, who are your LGBT plus role models?
Oh my gosh, I have so many that I have no idea which one I'm going to pick up. I'm actually going to, I might not even be allowed to do this, but I'm going to anyway.
Do it anyway.
Rosen, this is his latest book, Amp. I probably shouldn't show it too long, I'll get in trouble with my own publisher. Lev is a very dear friend of mine, but he's also an enormous role model to me. Absolutely incredible writer, and you know, while writing, even though his books are so completely different, he's writing LGBTYA, which is, you know, worlds apart from what I've written. I was looking through his books while I was writing mine, and he's been an enormous inspiration to me. So yeah, and also Juno Dawson as well. I do have her. I came prepared, see?
You were so prepared.
Latest, Wonderland, absolutely incredible. So yeah, I think my biggest inspiration are all the incredible LGBT plus authors, you know, in my community, doing good things and creating great books that I love to read.
And what's interesting, you talking about the kind of elements of drugs or sex within your book, both Lev and Juno often do you talk about those in a way that is really accessible to teenagers in their books? I think it's a really exciting that we're allowing ourselves to have kind of LGBTYA that doesn't shy away from reality, and that allows LGBT teen protagonists to have just the same kind of experiences as their straight counterparts. They're not kind of being put into a nice neat corner. I can see my copy of Camp over there on the shelf, both both seconding the icon statuses of both Lev and Gino as well. They're both amazing.
Yeah. Like just everything you said there, completely agree, which again is why I didn't want to slap an 18 sticker on this book and say if you're under 18 you shouldn't read this, because I think younger people can read it. It's just I don't want to get myself into trouble.
I think it's with everything, have a look at what might be covered and make up your own minds. Question for Evelyn: how was it seeing your book for the first time, physical book?
Oh my! So because it goes on quite a process. The first book I got was blank on the inside, the cover, and then I got like a little paperback mock-up of the book. But this is the final book, and it only arrived like 2 days ago. And Rowan, I have to show you this.
Please
it's
do.
How beautiful!
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. No, it's an absolutely amazing feeling. Like finally, like it looks like a real book, because when you're writing it, it's much of the time just a Word document, an ugly Word document, and then suddenly it becomes this beautiful, gorgeous book. And yeah, it's all the feelings you would expect to finally see your hard work pay off.
Amazing. I mean, I have a feeling I'll have a lot of answers for that, considering that you literally just pulled about 17 books out from underneath the camera just then. But Weasel's Jungle wants to know, what books did you read while writing your book? Were you reading other travel stuff, other LGBT stuff, things to just take your mind off what you were doing? What was on your bedside table for the readings?
I deliberately was trying to steer clear of other travel books because I didn't accidentally them to kind of slip in and make me change the way that I was writing. And it was so unbelievably tempting to go back to Eat, Pray, Love and have another read through that, to kind of give me inspiration. But I didn't want to be swayed too much, so I actively avoided things like that. So I was mostly sticking to LGBT fiction, and I have a particular love for YA, so I was reading a lot of YA LGBT fiction.
Why do you think that is? Why is that a particular kind of favorite genre of yours?
I know the answer to this, and it's because I didn't get to live it. So many LGBT people don't get to live it. We're in the closet for our teenage years, and I never got to kiss a boy in the schoolyard. I never got to dance with a boy at the school dance or at the prom. I never got to pass love notes to other boys in the classroom. I never got to do any of those things, and I'm not alone in this. This is something that's quite common. It's great when you hear stories of younger LGBT plus people coming out at like 11 years old now, which is insane to me, and that's amazing. But I still do think that there are so many people miss out on their younger years, on their teenage years, and reading these books, like going back to Camp, for instance, that's about an LGBT plus summer camp. Like I would have died a happy young queer teenage boy if I got to go to an LGBT plus summer camp. So it's living all of that, and I think I will always have a love for it, because it's a tiny piece that's missing, and it fills that little hole.
Oh, such a nice answer. There's a few more questions we're going through here, but again, in the chat, one last time, if you have any questions for Calum, if you put them in the chat, someone is going to be collating them into this nice Google Doc I have in front of me. So hopefully we'll be able to get through everyone's questions by the end of the live stream. So let's have this travel question from at Skippy Top. COVID seems like it's going to be affecting travel for some time to come. Do you see yourself traveling the world like after this? Do you think your interest in travel kind of take you out there, or is it maybe put you off?
I cannot wait to travel again, but I'm not just going to, book a flight the second that the government say it's okay to do so. I believe that would be irresponsible, and I believe, following the medical data and the science. And when it's genuinely safe for us to travel, it will be the first thing I'm doing. I cannot wait. Travel has always been, as you will find out in this book, it's been such an instrumental part of my life. And it is, this book finished, I think the final page of this book, I'm 24 years old, I think it's, so 2014, I have continued to travel constantly after that, and I always will. It's one of my favorite things in the world, getting out there, meeting people, exploring, meeting fellow queer people. It's the best thing in the world. Can't wait.
Okay, post-COVID, we can go on a trip together.
Okay.
Fly across the seas.
Done.
Hilariously, I was actually in Mexico when COVID kind of started to become a thing, and I arrived in Mexico, and it was something that no one was really taking very seriously. And about halfway through, everyone started shutting down their countries. And by the time we got to the end, I was the only person on my trip who was able to fly home. Everyone else got stuck in Mexico for, I think one person was there for like 2 weeks afterwards, because they all had flights going through the US, and obviously Trump shut down all air travel, so no one was physically able to get back to their various European countries. So yeah, no, I've already kind of had an interesting travel experience from this.
Usually I would be like, oh, that's great, stuck in Mexico for 2 weeks, brilliant. But I guess it wouldn't have been, because everything's shutting down. There's a health risk. Then that sounds terrible. I'm glad you managed to get back. Glad you.
Be right in. So at Angel_Bex has an interesting one, because I kind of think asked a slightly different version of this question. So I asked which of the experiences you'd had in the book had the most impact on you, but they are asking, what was your favorite story to write about?
Oh, yeah, I think I'm going to say the most enjoyable to write was Thailand. And that's because as I wrote it, I got to relive it. And it's probably one of the most enriching experiences I've ever had. I was living with monks, working with animals, living out in a forest in the middle of nowhere, meeting all of these incredible people. And then obviously you have the two central characters of the Thailand section, which are Ying and Lawan, who are a lesbian girl and a transgender person. And just meeting them and the fun we had, I got to relive it all. And it was it was probably quite difficult to write the Thailand section, because there was so much I wanted to say. I felt a bit distracted. I was like, oh, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. And I really had to kind of rein myself in and stay on track and keep it relevant to the central points of the plot. But it was such a pleasure to write. I felt like I was back there all over again.
I have going to ask my favourite question from this document now. Ellie Balga 13 asks, who would you cast to play you in a film or TV adaptation of this book?
Who would I cast as myself? I don't know. I'm just going to be like really vain and narcissistic and say Tom Holland, because I have a sweet spot.
Just like a really attractive guy in his 20s.
I would love Tom Holland to play me on a little gay adventure. I would adore that.
I could see this being a really interesting TV show, honestly, like different episodes in different places, kind of going through. I'll say, get Tom Holland on the phone. Anyone know him in the chat? Get him on the phone. So we have from Yanina Hope, more of the questions we were talking earlier about wanting to sort of demystify publishing and all that kind of jazz. So I'm excited that this question's been asked about, how did you find the publisher? Was it hard? Like, how did that process happen? So you talked a little bit about having an agent, but as some people might know, generally the idea is that you have an agent first, and then that agent is able to approach publishers for you. So how was that process for you?
The working with the publisher was such a joy. I always thought that part of the process was going to be the most difficult part. I thought they were going to be really restrictive and try to force to, change the story in ways that I didn't want to, but they didn't. They completely believed in my vision and let me write the book that I wanted to write without interfering too much. I mean, I had an amazing editor working on the book, Ian Wong, who was LGBT plus himself. So kind of having his insight really, it really helped. It was such a wonderful, wonderful process. Now that I'm not saying that everybody has that experience when they work with a publisher, and I've spoken to friends who haven't. So I do feel very, very grateful, and I'm unbelievably grateful to Hodder for supporting me and believing me, and not never trying to put words in my mouth.
Amazing. Let's look, we've only got a couple of questions actually still left from these guys, so we are going to be able to get through all of them. Love that for us. At Sammy Skate asks, any plans for YouTube stuff from you in the future?
People keep asking. So obviously, I made a name for myself on YouTube. I built so much of the career that I have now off YouTube, and I haven't abandoned it. I promise that I have not abandoned it, but I very much see YouTube as a string in my bow. It's one platform that I have, and I haven't forgot about it, and I'm still aware that it's there, and I will go back to it. But it's not, once upon a time I was uploading 1 or 2 videos every single week, and that's not where I am anymore. I'm predominantly focused on being a writer. I want to be a full-time author. I want to be, publishing loads and loads of books. So that takes up most of my time and energy. But YouTube is still there in the back of my mind, and I have a few ideas for little short films and things. Before I left YouTube, I never left. Before I without uploading, I had uploaded a few short films, and you were even in my most recent one, right?
I was.
It was lovely. It was a tribute to the LGBT community on YouTube. I want to create more things like that, things that are more meaningful. I'm not saying I won't ever sit down in front of a camera and just chat again. I probably will, but I'm not racing to do that right now.
This is quite a random question, but you know what? I'm excited to find out the answer. At Phantom Scorpio asks, what is your favorite thriller book? Are you a thriller reader?
No.
Wow, in which case, read Gone Girl. That's Rowan's advice.
I'm not even sure I've read a thriller. I love thriller movies, but I don't know if I've even read a thriller,
Read Gone Girl. Read Gone Girl. It's really good.
It's like The Handmaid's Tale a thriller? No? Like dystopian.
Well, it is, to be fair, it's a bit of a weird genre because it's sort of how much is something a horror versus a thriller versus like a detective versus a police procedural. It's a bit of a loose line there, I think.
The Handmaid's Tale is my favourite book. If that's a thriller, there's your answer.
It thrills me.
I have a lot of favourite books.
I'm gonna do. How long we got? Oh, we're gonna pack it in. We're gonna pack these in. We've only got a couple more minutes, but we want to get as many questions in as possible. So I'm going to go back to some of mine I had. So one of the things we talked very briefly about this earlier in the live chat about Section 28. One of the really exciting things for me about the book is it goes beyond American LGBT history, which is oftentimes all we sort of hear about. It's, you talk about Admiral Duncan attack, you talk about Section 28, things like that, and also within the other countries that you're visiting as well. How important was it for you to not just talk about your past and your history, but also the kind of wider context of the community as well?
It's so important to me. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes we make as a community is that we tend to focus on America, sometimes the UK as well, but so much of our understanding of where we came from comes from, what happened in America, which is so important. I think the modern day queer liberation movement starting in America, they gave us the rainbow flag, all of that, so important. The Stonewall riots, so important. But also there have been all of these communities all around the world of LGBT plus people fighting for their rights as well alongside that, and we never ever hear or talk about them. I drop a few names of LGBT plus activists from outside of America in the book, and I would love for people to maybe take an interest in those activists or go away and do a bit of research around some other activists around the world, because there's more to our history than America.
Absolutely. Anyone in the chat who's interested in what should I search for? Just search for abseiling lesbians and you will come across a really interesting piece of activism from the UK from a few years ago.
I don't even know if I know about this.
Oh my gosh, Google it, it's great. So I think that's everything that I was really super excited to ask you, and we've gone through all of the questions apart from one, which is great because we are literally at the very end of our time. We are professionals, Calum McSwiggan. this is actually a great question to end on. It's from @SkippyTop. Are there, so they've asked, any favorite persons, places, experiences to whet our appetites for the book, but feel free to do this in a very quick 3 phrases of like little like, oh, a like if you were describing Lord of the Rings, you might just be like, a dangerous mission, an evil piece of jewelry.
Rowan, I don't think
Whet our appetites, Calum.
I don't think I understand. So 3 little phrases.
This was me. This was my take on this question. I'm not going to lie. They basically just wanted to be like, give us something to whet our appetite with. But I quite like the idea of you kind of giving us some ideas of like, you know, bullet point list of here are some things you might expect to find in the book.
Okay, so it's like exploring gender identity in Thailand with tigers. There are tigers as well.
Love that.
Exploring LGBT plus nightlife of London with drag queens. And salacious romps in sex clubs in Berlin. Done.
Beautiful. That was an incredible one to end on. That's everything. That's all the questions I have. That's all the questions in the chat. So yeah, if you want to finish with where people can buy the book, I'm pretty sure the link is in. I say you can start off and then I answer the question for you. I'm pretty sure Waterstones now has the link to buy your book in their bio. It's their current link in bio. So if anyone has been excited about any of the answers Calum has given, or that exciting 3 bullet point summary, then that is going to be a really super easy way of finding it. Eat, Gay, Love. Here it is once again.
July 9th it's out, but it is available to pre-order now, and it massively helps me if you do pre-order. So if you've enjoyed this and you haven't ordered yourself a copy, then please go do that. Get it from Waterstones. And thank you to you, Rowan. You've been an incredible host, and I think that's the end.
For actually answering my questions. Yeah. Thanks everyone for being in the chat. We will see you at some point, I'm sure, in the future on one of these live streams again.
We sure will. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming. See you later.